I've been bodybuilding now for probably about 9 years or so. I turned pro 5 years ago. I turned pro in women's physique. I started out in figure, and now I'm in women's bodybuilding finally. So I'm just definitely a progression from figure to women's physique to now women's bodybuilding. The last going on my third year in women's bodybuilding now. So personal trainer, spouse. I have a wife. I have twins. I have boy girl twins. They're two, so throw that in the mix of everything else that's chaotic and all that. But yeah, so yeah, I love competing. Just finished the Rising Phoenix, and we're a little over 4 weeks out from the Olympia now. So
Yeah, very exciting.
yeah.
What kind of led to your evolution through the kind of the different divisions and trying to, figure out, was it just kind of figure out like what was best for you, really?
It's a lot of that. Like it's funny because it's you when I first started out, I actually just made a post about this. The very first time I stepped on stage, I weighed 116. I just left the Rising Phoenix and I was like 164 on stage. So it's like just it's definitely been a progression over the years. As you continue to train and add more muscle, I almost kind of grew out of each division is basically kind of what happened. I could have dialed back the training, maybe lifted less, but I didn't really want to do that. I just kind of went to see. And so figure, we did that for a couple years and then transferred over to women's physique. And I just got too big for figure. And that's what they were telling me. I was still placing like top five. And then they're like, but if you really want to, win at nationals, you need to switch over. So women's physique. And that's where I turned pro in women's physique. And then from there, my last women's physique show, Linda Murray actually pulled me to the side and she's like, women's bodybuilding is really making a comeback. And it did. Like that next year, they had a whole big thing, and it made it back to the Olympia. And she's like, you need to switch over. I think and I got some feedback from the judges that I was getting too big for physique. And so it was, yeah. And so bodybuilding, that's where we're at now. So
When you first got into the sport, what was your kind of reason or motivation behind it? Was it to try it out? Was it to win? Like what was it behind it for you?
mm, I feel like for me, like initially I was kind of the opposite. I was going out, I was drinking, I was partying, that kind of thing. And then that was getting out of hand. And so I kind of just needed something to reel that back in. And I think I found the gym and I just started training and working out. And then I met some people at the gym and they, were going to compete and they were competing at shows. And I went to my first like bodybuilding competition and I was like, oh man, I kind of think I want to do that. And they're like, yeah, okay, but the level of discipline, it was so opposite of what I had been doing with my life initially. And I was like, it was a good switch. It was something that I needed. And it just kind of started from there. Um, I joined the gym, started training, became a personal trainer, went to my first show, trained for about a year, and then I did my first competition. Like I quit my job. It was like something I was doing just like retail stuff, and I got a job at the gym. I got a job at a vitamin shop store. Like I wanted everything to do with fitness, so it was just a complete like 360. And then everything just kind of. I met my first coach, who I actually turned pro with while I was working at Vitamin Shop. She came in as a customer and we started talking. And I was like, and she was like 2 weeks out from a show and no one actually wanted to work with her. They didn't want to help her because they was like, oh, she's got an attitude, she's mean. I'm like, well, she's 2 weeks from the show. And then I walked up to her and I'm like, I want to look like you. And she just kind of laughed. And I was like, and we exchanged numbers. And yeah, we were together for about 8 years. I started with her with figure and then I turned pro in physique, working with her. And we're still good friends now. But yeah, yeah, just kind of threw myself into the entire fitness industry, just kind of head on.
Was it whenever you first got into it and you were kind of doing those initial shows, did you have kind of this vision of, okay, this is what I see for myself? This is, was your was your vision that big at that point?
No, like the first couple of shows, like after I went to my first show and I was like, oh man, that's cool. And then, you see the magazines, like muscle and fitness magazines were still like really big then. And and I was like, oh, that's cool. And I'd love to be in a magazine. I thought that'd be awesome. But like the first couple of shows, I was like, I wasn't real sure how I was gonna place. You were nervous the first time going on stage. And I have like severe stage fright. So it was like a whole thing. But then I actually placed pretty good. And a lot of the judges were like, you have a good structure for bodybuilding. And then my coach at the time was like, let's just see how far we could take it. And so we did the first couple years. It was, just doing my, regular season shows. And then we did a national show. And I just started taking it a little bit more serious as time went on. And yeah, we went and did a national show and we did a couple more, and then we just kind of were getting better and better. And it just was like, well, maybe I can actually go pro one, because that's always a thing now. Can you go pro? And then I did go pro, and then I won the overall, and it was like, okay, so now what? So yeah, but it was, yeah. At first, it was just like, let's just do a show, and then I just kind of got really, either you get hooked or you don't. I kind of feel like so. Either you're like, oh God, I can never diet like this again, and I don't ever want to do this again. And then like I feel that way sometimes too. But then it's like, yeah, but when's the next show? And it just kind of you forget about the dieting for a moment. But like now, it's just I enjoy it. It's
Yeah, I have a little bit of experience, not in bodybuilding, but I ran a marathon and I was getting ready for that, and I didn't definitely didn't give myself enough time to get ready, but I ended up running it.
mm,
And after I was done, I was like, good experience, never doing that again. And I feel like it's almost similar. You either
it
get
is.
the
Yes.
bug of it and it's like
Hmm.
you don't
Hmm.
care. Because like right after you're thinking about, at least in my experience, thinking about the pain of it, thinking about how tired you are, thinking about all that stuff, and you're reminiscing about the training, oh my gosh, it was so hard, it was so time consuming. And I feel like if you love it, it doesn't really take as much time to be like, but let's do it again. For me, it's like, 4 years later and I'm starting to think about it, but not really. So I feel like it's
Hmm.
like what's that almost like period between that sucked, but it was awesome and let's do it again. I think if it's shorter, it's meant for you.
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, and over the 9 years, I mean, I guess just as I've just gotten older, as I've gotten involved into the sport even more, I mean, there were times when I would compete season after season. And then there was a point in time, and that's when life happens. And I'm like, you know what? I couldn't diet accordingly. And I just kind of stepped back and I took a year and a half off and I didn't compete at all. And I just, kind of just did my normal stuff. And then it's like, and I needed that break because I wasn't enjoying it as much. And it was like, huh, that's different. And I didn't like how that felt. So I'm like, well, let's just step back. Obviously, I need a break. And then injuries were popping up and things like that. So I'm like, just take a break. And then when I came back with a vengeance. And it's been no less than, top 10 in any show. It's been 4 Olympias in a row, but I needed that break because I just wasn't feeling it. My placing showed it. I wasn't giving my all on stage either. And then as a pro, it's a little bit different. I just feel like you have to be all in or not. Like there's not a lot of wiggle room, especially when you have sponsors and things like that too. So it's yeah. I mean, it was definitely I did some shows and for a long time, and then I needed a break, and I took that break, and like once I came back, it was fell in love with it all over again for sure.
When you did turn pro, was there any, you probably like have this moment of, oh my gosh, this is awesome, this is great. But right after, were there any realizations that you had, anything in your, because it's hard to put yourself in a certain situation a lot of times and fully grasp it until you're in that situation. So once you turn pro, did you have any like thoughts of, oh wow, we're gonna have to do this differently, we're gonna have to do this new thing, or was there any like thoughts in your head just like right after that you just didn't expect to have?
I mean, even like turning pro itself was just like that was just huge, and it was a very very long long and tedious prep. I mean, like that moment that they actually called it and announced it, and I was like, oh, because I'd been so close the year before, and like was fifth place and third place. It was like kind of like right there, and it was just like everything that I did everything right that prep, and it was like to see that what I had done right worked and it was good enough, and it was like wow. So like that moment, I was just like, oh my god, we're pro. But then it's like, okay, so now what? Are you going to be a pro, and you are just that's just what you're going to do? Like you're just going to say you're a pro, or are you going to actually actively go out there and compete and now go against some of the bigger names and the bigger girls that are popular right now? So it was like, oh shit. And then it was kind of like, all right, I got to be better than this though. Like, and it was like, but this was a lot because like it was funny because that prep, and I can honestly say that was the best prep I've ever had, where it's not a meal was missed, not a cardio session was missed, and at a point, and I tell my clients, I'm a personal trainer, I'm like, and I always preach consistency, but it was like 3 hours of cardio consistently is a lot, but we did that, and it paid off. But it was like, oh my god, can I really continue to do that, and do I have to do more? It was kind of like to get to now this next level. And I ended up doing a pro show. I mean, like 3 months after I turned pro, I was like, let's just get in there and let's just do it. And I actually took second at my pro debut. I lost to veteran Mindy O'Brien, who has been, I don't know, 20 years in the in bodybuilding. But and I was like awestruck. I'm like, I'm sitting next to Mindy O'Brien, who is already like an 8-time Olympian, who's won this, that, and the third. And I'm like freaking out. And it was funny because I'm like brand new, and I'm just like, oh god, oh god. It was a really cool affair, very cool experience, though, I must say.
After a kind of like a what you would consider maybe like a perfect prep, and you say like it's hey, we did everything right, we did everything the way it was supposed to be done, and then we kind of got to the situation, we achieved what we wanted to achieve from that. Was there any like intimidation or like question of okay, to yourself or to your coach, that was great and that was awesome, but now looking at this next level of competition, how do we even like raise the level? How do we optimize what we already kind of some ways did perfect?
Yeah, that for sure. And I had a really good debut. My debut, I took second, and I ended up doing a show right after that, maybe 2 weeks later, and I took 14th. And so then I was like, what the what the hell just happened? It's like 2 weeks later, and I was like, how do I go from second to 14th? I think I look the same. But I was also going against different people, right? So it's like it's kind of that thing too. But it was a very quick slap in the face. Like you have to always be good, and you have to always be spot on at every show. And 2 weeks ago, no one really gives a shit about it anymore. No one cares, It's like, but it was one of those I'll never get. I was like that show, and I was like, and I didn't get the first call out, and I was like in third call out, and I'm like. I got off stage. I'm like, okay, that's it. I'm done. I'm done. We're done. We're done. This is it. Done. So it was my coach like, we're not. Take a minute. Go ahead and get that out your system, and because it was a whole mess. I remember going back for the evening show, and I knew when I was already in third call out because you'll be at prejudging, and I was in the bathroom changing, and I was like, I'm not going back out there. My coach literally came in the bathroom, threw my suit at me, and drugged me out of the bathroom. She's like, you're getting back on stage because if not, you're a pro now. You're gonna get fined. And so there's a whole separate thing now, and I'm like. But I remember she literally dragged me out of the bathroom to take me back to the stage. I was like, okay, and get me lined up. I was just like, I'm done. This is it. I quit. I quit. Yeah. So,
I mean, what kind of like was that a turning point for you? Like the realization that this kind of is like a whole nother game, like we're playing
yeah.
almost.
Oh yeah. It definitely is. It definitely is. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I had, I mean, and that was a point I had, and I probably competed for another maybe 2 years, like 2, 3 years in women's physique. And it was the same thing. I was kind of okay. I would get like a top 10 or maybe a 12, but I wasn't like giving it my all. And I was getting frustrated. I'm like, what do they want from me? Like, what more do I need to do? What do I need to change? And that's when I really started getting feedback from the judges and like, you know what? Because I was also that person that would go and post my picture next to someone else's picture on Instagram and be like, well, I think I look great. Well, no one cares because the judges are the judges. And so if you really want feedback, which is what I tell people now, then you talk to the judges because they're literally the only ones that matter. So, but yeah, I used to do that. I'm like, I just don't understand what they want. And I would get frustrated with my coach. And it was just, why does this girl look better than me? Is she doing this different or what is she doing differently? So, I mean, I definitely went through that period. And then it got to a point where I'm like, I'm just going to, and that's where I kind of ended up stepping back for a bit and kind of reevaluating things. And came back and we made some changes in coaching and things like that. And then my attitude changed as well once I came back too, I think.
Yeah, I think it's such like an evolution.
Mm-hmm.
Everything, it's all like shows itself physically, but it's all about mental, it's all about like
Mm-hmm.
the
Oh yeah.
habits that you're willing to,
Mm-hmm.
pretty much every action starts within your head. It's making a decision like, are you going to
Yeah.
do that action? And
Yeah.
usually that's the hardest part in and of itself is making that decision and then sticking with that and making that decision
Mm-hmm.
every day too, because like
Yes.
you can say,
Yes,
hey, we're going to
exactly.
do this like on day one. You can say, oh, we're going to do this for the next, 16 weeks and it's going to be great and blah, blah,
Mm-hmm.
blah. But the second day, you still have to like make that decision again. It's
Yes.
not
And
a one-time thing.
yes, exactly. And that's the thing too. It's either you fall in love with that part or you don't, I guess, because it's like, yeah, you're gonna go do cardio every day. You're gonna probably eat this meal every day. But you kind of have to do that no matter what. Like it doesn't matter if it snowed or if it doesn't matter if this happened or that. You just kind of do it. And actually I had a client ask me that and he's like, so like when you're done with like work, how do you just like go to the gym? I'm like, it's not fair to say, but I just do. Like I just do it. My thing is it's gym and then everything else. But that's how I schedule my life. I schedule gym, and everything else gets scheduled around that. So you find a way, everything gets done, but that's how I have to look at things. And that's when I tell clients, I'm like, consistency. I eat the same meal basically every day. There's not much, we're not doing too much here. And that's for most bodybuilders. We're kind of all eating chicken. We're all probably eating rice. I mean, it's not, timing is a little bit of it too, but we're kind of all doing the same thing. So it's like who's doing it better and who's doing it the most consistent is really what it kind of boils down to. So I mean genetics, of course, but a lot of it is who's really doing it consistently. And on days when I'm exhausted and my kids have driven me up a wall, but I still got 2 hours of cardio to do, it has to get done. So it's you just do it.
This episode is sponsored by Fountain TRT. Fountain wants to help you with your potential low T. Why do I say potential low T? Because a large percentage of men don't even know they're suffering from low T. They simply live with the symptoms that include weight gain, sluggishness, and erectile dysfunction, and have no idea of the cause. Fountain wants to help you figure out if low T is your issue and help you get your levels back to a healthy range with a topical cream. The Fountain team are medical professionals who have years of experience in the industry and expertise in TRT. These labs are often covered by insurance, and you may not have to pay anything out of pocket. The topical treatment is easy to use, just apply it once daily to your shoulder area. Most men start seeing results immediately. So if you're ready to gain back your energy, drive, and mental clarity, lose that stubborn weight, and just generally feel happier, check out Fountain TRT and use the link below to support the weight room and claim your $1 evaluation. This episode is brought to you by Move Your Body Apparel, a Lexington-based, community-ran premium activewear brand that promotes the importance of daily movement. For the rest of the year, MYB is donating a percentage of every order to the Special Olympics of Kentucky. Save 20% off your first order with the link below or use code TWR20 online at mybapparel.com. That's, I think, such a hard thing to put on someone else. Like if someone asks you, how do you do it? And you generally just do it and you don't even know how you do it. It's so hard to like there's no like statement you can make or like words of wisdom you can give almost. It's just like you've almost given up trying to understand it yourself and you're just like, it's screw it. I'm just going to do it. And it's so hard to put that
into
yeah, someone else.
Yeah. And it is. And I feel like a lot of us are like, and I tell people, I'm like, there's times that I don't want to do it, but I know if I don't, my competition is going to do it. So for me, that's kind of a motivating factor too. And I do, and I know if I do it, I'm going to look a certain way, or I'm going to do this, and I'm going to be a lot more successful, if I go ahead and comply and do what I'm going to do, So it's, yeah. But at this point, for me, at this point now, like, I mean, I enjoy competing. I enjoy being in women's bodybuilding. I've gotten invited to some really big shows, so like knowing the level of competition just pushes me a little bit harder. And the girls are really supportive. Like women's bodybuilding is just different. Like everyone's just kind of like cool. Like we're all kind of in this together kind of thing. So like no one's really catty. Like everyone's kind of chill backstage and we're like doing our thing. But we have fun backstage. So I don't know. It's a whole community, but I enjoy it. I really do. My gyms are super supportive when they know I'm competing and everything. So it's nice.
So getting to that first Olympia, how did that change just everything for you? Not necessarily in that one show, but moving past it to the next season. Like, how did that change your outlook? How did that change your preparation? How did that change everything for you moving forward?
That first Olympia, and I think from that point on, almost became a threat in the lineup. It was like, people started to recognize who I was. I mean, the first Olympia I went to, ended up doing 5 shows in total that year because I went on points. So I had to do several shows, and it was still like that whole season, like, am I going to actually qualify? Did I make it? So the first one was like, and then after that first one, I was like, okay, we got here, and we looked pretty good, and it was I placed reasonable for my first Olympia, and I'm like, now thinking, how can I get back here? And it was always like, how can I get back here, and how can I improve? But like that kind of just started like, who is she? And like I started, doing little. I got picked up by Wings of Strength that following year too, which was huge. They, as far as sponsorships and things. And then I don't know. I started placing well in bodybuilding, and it was a really good fit. And yeah, so then was the second Olympia, and then third. My second and third, I did it. My first one I was in women's physique, and then the second two, I had switched over to women's bodybuilding. And it's been just a constant. I did the first year, it took me 5 shows to get there. The second year, it took me 4 shows to get there. And the third year, actually, I won my show. So it was like, so last year and this year, I won the shows. So it was like I did one show and I could rest. I didn't have to do all these shows and go on points. It was a nice little break. So like this year was like the greatest. I qualified the earliest I've ever qualified for, and then got the invite to Rising Phoenix. So it's just been, yeah, ever since that first Olympics, it's been like a shift. And I guess it's been a big change in me and what I expect from myself. And the same thing with like my coaching staff. There's a certain level that they expect. They work with a certain level of athlete, so the expectation is just higher. So like I remember when I first started competing, and I would tell my coach that I cheated on my diet, and she's like, "Oh my God, you can't do that." And we would have this whole conversation. Whereas now, that's just not an option. And like I remember my coach, he's like, I'm like, yeah, I had an extra so and so or whatever. Like I had a bagel. And he's like, oh yeah, no, don't do that. We don't do that. And that was just and he just kind of went on. He's like, we don't do that, and that was it. That was the conversation. He's like, this is a different level. There's no time for that. So it was very much the expectation was so much different that it forced me to become better. So and I think that's what I needed. And so things have, and over the years now, I've just gotten better. So
And having like, more time knowing that, okay, I'm qualified for the Olympia, how does that actually change, you know, because I'm thinking about it from like perspective of like NFL, whenever like you get that bye week in the first week of the playoffs, right? And
mm-hmm,
sometimes that team that comes off that bye week, they can get upset because they're not necessarily in the same, they're not, they didn't just play, they don't have that chemistry, they don't have, there's certain things about being
mm-hmm,
in the game that can
mm-hmm.
change everything. So does it feel to you like almost you have to stay just as mentally sharp as if you were competing throughout kind of a longer time frame?
Yeah, so it's interesting. So like these it's like competing is just it's taxing on the body, right? So it's a lot. So like the first year I did 5 shows, and it was just hard because like I did 2 shows that were like back to back, and then I had like literally they were a week apart, and then ended up having the Olympia 6 weeks later. So my body was just not, it was just like I was already up max on cardio. My body just wasn't responding. I was just tired. And you could kind of see it on stage. I was just tired. Versus like now, this year especially, we had a chance to kind of really regroup and reset. Um, we had time to add a little bit more size on. So I actually, and just more time to prepare. Like once I won, I was like, well, we can actually kind of sit back. We can really focus on, the Rising Phoenix. We can focus on the Olympia. We have time to grow and really make sure everything is spot on. So I enjoyed having the time off. It made me healthier. I feel like I'm just rejuvenated. I'm ready to go. So I felt great at the Rising Phoenix, and I'll be even better at the Olympia. But actually, for me, having that time off was great. And then it's just so much less stress. Like I'm watching the other shows, and I'm like, oh my God, and I'm like, ooh, who's gonna win? And I'm just sitting there like, well, we're just watching because we're good. And it was just that was actually a nice feeling I gave me life. It was like not having to like, because when you're going on points, you're constantly watching, see who's doing what show, and the points, and the points are different for each show. So you're constantly like, okay, do I have to do one more show? And I ended up doing an extra show one year and didn't need to because my other 3 placings were high enough. But you did it because you weren't quite sure who was going to do it. So it was like it was almost a wasted dial in for no reason. So like that kind of stuff, it's hard. So I'm like having this break was great for me. So I feel awesome going into the Olympia.
What's different for you as far as like the way that you are approaching it from a mental game, from a physical game? Like, how are you really trying to optimize this experience to do the best that you can on stage?
This is this has been my best year competing, like hands down. Um, from winning the show in Puerto Rico, the judges' feedback at that show, literally that this was the best they had ever seen me. So I just feel good. I feel really confident going into the show. Um, Coming off that win and then placing top 10 in the Rising Phoenix, like I'm a threat in the lineup, and I know this. And so like my coach is super supportive. He's like, we're a threat going into the Olympia. We're no less than the top 6 is how we're looking at things. But I know I can be competitive. And then I've already spoken with the head judge after Rising Phoenix. We have a couple little things to tweak, but like our conditioning's good. My conditioning has never been better. My diet's been meticulous. So I feel really good going into the show. I feel really good.
Do you do anything to, since you do have much more time to recover as well as get better, are you doing anything new, different, or not necessarily maybe new or different, but just optimizing something, whether it be sleep, whether it be, any kind of way to get your body feeling kind of as good as it can be, massage, things like that that
Oh
uh,
yeah,
you're
that's
doing?
yeah. So I mean, I go weekly. I have a massage therapist who will actually be at the Olympia as well because he's traveling there to be support, and will work on me at the show as well. But I go weekly for massages. I do cryotherapy just to kind of help rejuvenate everything. But that's like the massages and things and kind of deep tissue stuff. That's maintenance for me. That's just a standard routine, and I do that every week. So that's kind of how my recovery and such. And then otherwise, no, I mean it's not doing too much different. I mean, we had some downtime after we did Puerto Rico, and we just used that to up the carbs and to kind of get some more size. So because I needed a little bit more size going into Rising Phoenix and going into the Olympia. The girls are just going to be a little bit bigger. So we used that time just to kind of pack on some more food because we had it. We didn't have to worry. We had the time, and I knew I had enough time to get lean again. So yeah, the package that we brought at Rising Phoenix versus Puerto Rico, I was bigger and leaner, and actually weighed the same on stage, which is funny. So, but I literally was just bigger and more muscular. So, we're expecting the same thing now, going into the Olympia, that I'm going to come in a little bit fuller, a little bit drier. So, yeah, I feel really good.
As a competitor who has kind of reached, very high level in the sport, what do you see, from other pros who haven't qualified for the Olympia? What do you see as kind of like some of the biggest differences in a non-qualified, Olympian pro versus a qualified Olympian pro?
I mean, I don't know. It gets tough sometimes because it's like sometimes it's the luck of the show that you do, and who shows up, and this, that, and the third. Whether it's a huge lineup, or smaller lineup, or so some of it is the luck of the draw, I guess, in what show you choose, honestly. But I think it comes down to, like, for me personally, I just took it more serious. I dieted better, I trained harder, and that was kind of the shift. So I feel like at a point there, sometimes people turn pro, and it's like, hey, they turn pro, and it's like great, but you got to put in the effort if you want to place high, and be in that first call out, the top 5 or top 10. It takes work to get there, and it takes work to stay there. So like even now going into my fourth Olympia, each time it was like, how am I going to get there the next year? So like after I got to the first one, it was like immediate was like, okay, well, how do I get qualified again? And so that second year, I did 4 shows instead of 5, and those 4 shows were good enough. I went on points again. And then that third year, I actually was coming back off of an injury, and I won Savannah. Savannah was literally the last show of the regular season, and it was either win it or you're out. And I won it. And that's how I got to the Olympia. So it was like, but it was like back against the wall, do or die. And this is your one shot to get to the Olympia. That's it. And we made it work, and we won. So it was like, and that was like huge for me. I'm like, we came back from a shoulder injury 6 months later, and we won, and we're going back to the Olympia. But every year you're like, how are we going to get there? How are we going to get there? And then the same thing with Puerto Rico when I won. Um, they were pitting me against one of the other girls, and oh, can Reshanna pull it off? She's a lot smaller than the other girl. Like the girl had like 40 pounds on me, and it's like, can she pull it off? And I'm like, well, size doesn't matter. I think my lines are better. And hey, guess what? I won. And that's how I got my ticket to the Olympia. So every year you're constantly trying to figure out, hey, well, what shows to do, or, how am I going to get back there? Like, and sometimes you win your show and sometimes you don't. It's like, it's hard. It's just going, I can always get the judges' feedback. They'll always get the judges' feedback, and take it from there.
What do you feel like is the direction, or how do you think that the sport has kind of changed within the last, 8 years, looking back around when it kind of got started to get big on social media? Like I feel like it's boomed since then. I don't know if that's
Oh,
the
yeah.
only reason, but how do you feel like it's kind of evolved and changed, and what do you think the future will look like because of that?
It's definitely gotten more popular. I mean, obviously we have more categories. Social media has helped tremendously with that. Um, and it's like funny because like the last in this is probably because of COVID more than anything. Now that we have these like pay-per-view options, because you couldn't go to the shows and you couldn't have the audiences these last couple years, but now there's this whole pay-per-view thing, and you can stream the shows live, and that's just opening it up to a whole nother audience too, I think. And that's just becoming a huge thing too, like having the shows being able to stream the shows live in your living room. I feel like that's huge for us. I don't know. I feel like we're going in a positive direction now. I think we had a few years there where it was like you people knew about, like when I first started competing, it was like, okay, you're competing and it's cool. But then it wasn't as huge. It just wasn't as popular, I guess I would say. It kind of, and then you kind of had a point, and then it got big again. And then, you had some negative stuff happen in sports and people getting sick and dying, blah blah blah. Um, which you know, so then it had you get this like negative side of it. But now I feel like, especially with women's bodybuilding coming back, because once they pulled women's bodybuilding, I think that hurt a lot, and it kind of left things kind of in the air for a bit. Um, and it's almost like now with women's bodybuilding being back at the Olympia, it's a whole new era. It's a completely different look. They've made it very clear what they want and what they don't want to see in women's bodybuilding, in terms of just a level of femininity and the muscle and the conditioning and all that. So they've been pretty clear about what they want. And so I feel like now these last couple of years, it's just been such like almost a recruitment process as far as getting women bodybuilders to come back and to compete and to be able to have muscle, but still be able to carry it in such a way that it is still somewhat feminine and and it's still attractive and they can still market and it's sellable. So I feel like these last couple of years for sure, and especially in women's bodybuilding, there's been like just this huge boom. And so like everyone wants to come over to women's bodybuilding now. It's so funny. Um, but with like the categories, it's always changing. It's women's physique, they're extremely conditioned. I mean, even bikini girls are coming in pretty conditioned and so it's kind of getting tricky sometimes too. So it's like I think with the wellness category, they're trying to like even things out a bit and kind of making sure there's a category for everyone and really kind of sticking to what they say and rewarding what they actually say on paper, what that class should look like. So
Yeah.
I mean, but I think having the different categories for everyone else and being able to compete and having something for everyone is nice. It really is. I think everyone should be able to compete, in their respective categories.
This episode is brought to you by Move Your Body Apparel, a Lexington-based, community-ran premium activewear brand that promotes the importance of daily movement. For the rest of the year, MYB is donating a percentage of every order to the Special Olympics of Kentucky. Save 20% off your first order with the link below or use code TWR20 online at mybapparel.com. This episode is sponsored by Fountain TRT. A large percentage of men don't even know they're suffering from low T. Fountain wants to help you figure out if low T is your issue and help you get your levels back to a healthy range with a topical cream. The topical treatment is easy to use, just apply it once daily to your shoulder area. Most men start seeing results immediately. Check out Fountain TRT and use the link below to support the weight room and claim your $1 evaluation. This podcast is sponsored by Smoking Gun Coffee, a veteran-owned coffee company that strives to give back to those in need. Don't forget to use code TWR10 for a 10% discount at checkout. Do you think that we've reached kind of a good amount of classes or divisions, or do you think that there's going to be, if in the future, is there more coming? Is there kind of a consolidation maybe for whatever reason in 10, 15 years because something kind of goes out of style? Like, what do you think with
Hmm.
that? What do you think with that?
It goes back and forth though. I feel like there's always because like you look at like I would say probably the smallest category for me I always see is fitness. So fitness because unless you really have a gymnastic background, that's just not a category you can necessarily compete in. You have to have that fitness background. So like that category, I mean, there's definitely women that compete in that category. I feel like it's a smaller class. So I feel like there's going to be some more, pushing to kind of get that to revamp that class and get more competitors in that. I don't think we need more classes. I think we don't. I don't think we need more. I think we're good. I mean, because you have like the wheelchair, and then you have the bikini. You have the masters. They're going to come with the Masters Olympia, which I do think will be kind of awesome to have that. But I think for the most part right now, there's pretty much and wellness is still brand new. So that class is just going to take a couple years to really build up. But yeah, man, I think we're pretty good now. I think everyone's pretty much covered.
Yeah, it does. It seems like, going back to the popularity of it, you know, when you're seeing all these different brands kind of start endorsing bodybuilders. And I feel like a couple years ago, it would have been very hush hush about it, but just for kind of some of the negative stereotypes about it. But now you have all these different brands,
Yeah.
supplements and clothing and all
Mhm.
kinds of brands that are just like backing bodybuilders and, the
Yeah.
influencer game of social media becoming much more, I don't want to say like bodybuilding focused, but definitely you see more influencers doing a show or trying, to see what
Mhm.
that experience is like for whatever
Yeah.
reason. So,
Yeah.
yeah, I think it's going to be interesting just looking ahead and seeing how it grows, seeing how the leagues can kind of capitalize on that growth and see,
Mhm.
what how can we take this from where it is? And because I feel like bodybuilding has this kind of thing of going back and forth between popularity and unpopular,
Hmm.
underground and
Hmm.
popular. So,
Hmm.
with this growth, it's a real opportunity to kind of make it and put it on that level of like, hey, we're here to stay kind of thing.
Yeah. And I think like having like the pay-per-view and that kind of access, I think that actually helps a lot too. Just to kind of see, like really to see the athletes and you can kind of just stream it. I think that was a huge addition when that happened. That just brings it to so many more people. And I think we're in a good spot now as far as just growth. The IFBB, I feel like they actually just sent out an email not too long ago. There was a whole separate committee, that will address like grievances or any issues with competitors and athletes and things. So I think that's huge that they're really starting to understand that they have to embrace the athlete. I mean, we make or break this sport. Like we really, you have to take care of your athletes. So I think there's a lot more sponsorships. There's a lot more money in bodybuilding for sure. Especially when you're getting to that elite level, there's definitely money to be made there. There's a lot more sponsorships and a lot more people picking us up for supplements, for clothing. I mean, I had a water sponsor for a couple years, so like it's so many different avenues and not just supplements either. I think that's the big thing too, really starting to like branch out
Yeah.
and getting other people interested in it.
When it comes to competing at the Olympia, because obviously, it is so close, are there any things that you do leading up, like in the last few weeks, is there anything that is maybe like a tradition that you do? Is there anything that there's like I'm trying to think of the word. What is it? Like a superstition that you do or anything like that to where it's like, hey, I always do this, I'd never wash my sheets or I never, brush my teeth at, whatever time. Like, isn't there anything weird that you do with the leading up to the Olympia?
um, Not really. I'm just like super focused and just making sure that I've booked and scheduled everything and I'm like triple checking everything. Um, no, I don't. There's nothing too crazy. I mean, I always bring my family to the show, so for me, it's just like making sure that I have everything, planned out to a T. Because everyone's like, we bring the kids, we bring the nanny, so everyone comes. So just making sure I have everything kind of planned out and ready to go. Um, but no, everything is just like super focused. I write everything down though, so like every prep I have a new notebook for. So like my Olympia notebook started right after the Rising Phoenix. When I got home, I was like, okay, well that notebook's done. So we have the Olympia notebook because we started a fresh notebook for the Olympia prep, and it's all my workouts. It's just the cardio. It's whatever additional little exercises, foods, whatever my protocol, whatever I'm doing, everything is written in that notebook. But for me, that just keeps me on track. I'm very old school. I write everything down for my workouts. So I feel like when I get for like my Olympia prep, that's like super focused and super strict. Everything has to be written down, like super meticulous about that. Um, but like yeah, like this morning I kind of was like double checking. I'm like, okay, let's just confirm our bookings and let's make sure everything is still booked and everything is good. And but yeah, nothing too crazy outside of that. I'll get in a few days early and work out with my coach and stuff once I get there. So I'm looking forward to that. And just like everyone's going to be there for me, so it's just like yeah, I feel really good. I'm just kind of focused on it.
So that day of of competition, what take us through what you expect and that kind of thing.
Well, I remember it was funny. It's the very first Olympia, and I had a friend of mine, and she's coming for the first time, and I'm like, it's a whole production, right? It's a huge event, and like my very first one, like I didn't quite grasp it. Like you're kind of like popular all of a sudden, and everything's literally about you. And I was walking, and I had my luggage, and I was getting on the bus, and one of the workers came up to me, and she's like, "Oh no, let me get that for you." And like she like took my luggage, and I'm like, she's like, "Oh, you don't need that. You no, go to the bus. I got you." And I was like, "Oh." Just carrying my luggage. Like it was like this whole thing. And I was like, wow, they do everything. And then we went to the meet and greet, and like everyone was escorted individually by like security. And I'm just like, oh, but you're like walking down the red carpet and there's like fans on both sides of you, just like taking pictures and waving. And I'm just like, it was just like a whole experience. I'm like, oh my God. Just like, okay. So like that whole thing was like you're like a rock star and it's and like people are stopping you like constantly in the halls taking pictures and all that stuff. So like that was like huge. And I was like, I remember calling home. I'm like, yo, you don't carry anything. I didn't have to do anything. Everyone got you need water, you need this. Like they were getting everything. So I'm like, this is great. We can do this every year. This is awesome. So like, yeah, they take very good care of you at the show.
How do you balance that, like taking it all in versus staying focused?
Um, I don't know. I mean, it's a whole experience for sure. Like, but it's kind of one of those things. Like when I like just getting there, you're like, it's hard to explain. But once I'm there and I'm like in that environment, you're like, it's an honor it's an honor to be there. So it's like you just want to do your best. You just want to perform your best. You just, but it's like you're literally with the best of the best. Like that's, and to know that you're a part of that best is just a great feeling. So it's just you're like, wow, like you kind of like you made it almost, and that's just kind of how you feel. But you're around such an elite group, and it's like you're nervous, and I was like super nervous. I still get nervous, even going into my fourth one, and like you see some of the same faces, and then you see some of the faces that are new. um it's just an experience. And we had so the first one they do this every year. We have to sign like posters that they auction off and that they sell and stuff. And I remember I got there for my first one, the posters are like lined out. There's literally like 50. You sign like 50 posters in a row. And I signed my first one and I was like, sweet. And I'm walking off. And one of the other Olympians this was her fourth one, and she's like, hey, come here, sunshine. I was like, she's like, you got 49 more. And when I looked down the road, there were just tables lined up like, and I'm like, oh. She's like, you gotta sign them all. And she never lets me live that down. So she never lets me live that down. But that was a very funny moment because I signed the first one. I was like, oh, that's cool. Where's my name here? And I just was grabbing my bag to go leave. And she's like, no, there's another 49 to go. You need to. And they're like looking at me like, what are you doing? I'm like, oh, okay, sorry. I'm new. I'm new. I don't know what to say. So now it's a thing. I'm fine. But yeah.
That's awesome. And getting to chat with a few people who this will be their first Olympia, what advice would you give to them?
I've actually talked to two of the girls, and it is their first Olympia. And like right after one of the girls won, she texted me. She's like, "So what do I do now?" She's like, Who do I call? Like, you got the number to the Olympia? Is that a thing?" I was like, well, "Do I have the number to the Olympia people?" Well, I was like, "No, you're good. You don't really have to do anything. Trust me. They know you won." And they'll reach out to you via email shortly. Don't there's nothing left to do. She's like, oh, so I just wait? You wait. But it was so funny. She's like, so what do I do? Who do I call? And I'm like, you don't. But like my first one, I was like checking the email like every day, like, so what now? But like now I'm like, oh no, you're fine. You don't do anything. You're fine. But I would say what they told me, just enjoy the actual experience of it. Enjoy them doing everything for you and catering to you everywhere you go, because it's an awesome feeling. Yeah, but it's just enjoy the experience.
Yeah, that's awesome.
For sure.
So, what advice would you have for yourself? Looking back at all kind of the experiences that you've gained and wisdom that you've gained throughout your competitions, your preps, your off seasons, all that kind of stuff. What advice would you give to your younger self?
Start posing earlier. Pose sooner. Pick your music sooner. And I think that's one of the things for me. Like I was always someone that just in general, which is why going to bodybuilding, I've always had stage fright and not really like talking in front of people in big crowds and things, so of course this sport is like the complete opposite of that. So, but for me, the more I practice things and the more repetition, the easier it becomes. And then I can get on stage and perform it, flawlessly that way. It's practice. It's practice and repetition. So I'm not someone that can wing it on stage. Some people are great posers and they can just come up with something on the fly. I am not that person. So, but knowing that about myself, it's being honest with myself. Like, hey, you need a routine 10 weeks out, and you need to be practicing that 10 weeks out, not 6, or not 2 weeks out trying to put something together because it's going to show on stage. So I think I've learned over the years to really just take my time and learn to practice and learn to pose and to pose daily. And even it, in that last week or so, I probably pose more than I actually lift, just because I probably make that trend, because that's what you need to have. And that's what I've learned that really helps to dial in some of the muscle. And the more I'm flexing and posing, that becomes even more important to me just lifting, because 2 weeks out, I'm not adding muscle. You know what I mean? It's just not going to happen. So, but the posing can always improve. And as I get leaner and I get leaner day by day, the posing changes. So like, I might have to switch legs because now this hamstring on the left leg looks a lot better than it did 2 days ago. But that literally happens. So it's like, oh, okay. So making those adjustments and just practicing sooner. And like I tell my clients now, I'm like, practice your posing because it will make or break you on stage. I was on stage and I had a judge. She had me up there for 7 minutes. 7 minutes is a long time to hold poses under lights, and when your adrenaline's going and you're like sweating bullets, and and the breathing and learning to breathe and control your breathing and being able to hold your poses. So I've learned to practice my pose. Just practice your posing, because that will determine some that a lot of times will determine your placing, even if you have the better physique.
Yeah. And for you, getting on the Olympia stage, obviously the biggest kind of stage that there is in the sport, have you kind of learned to, is it more of like a let your subconscious mind take over, or is it very much like a thoughtful process for you?
It's I'd probably say it's a thoughtful process for me. I'm I've learned to, like, for me it's like, hey, I'm always going to get that adrenaline rush, and I'm always going to have some of the nerves, but I can say, but if I know that I've practiced enough and I've done everything leading up to that point, it gives me a sense of calmness. So like there's been times I've been like, oh my God, I didn't practice. I just learned this routine 2 weeks ago. But it shows on stage. So I've learned now, it's like, hey, but now you learned that routine 10 weeks ago. You've been practicing every single day. You've been diligent. So now just get out there and just do it. So like I go on a little bit of an autopilot, but I can talk myself into it like, hey, but you've done everything. So now this is the fun part, or this should be the fun part. So now let's just get out there and enjoy it and show the judges what you've literally practiced every single day. So it's yeah, so that's kind of how I do most things now. That's kind of how I feel mostly when I'm getting ready for a show now, right before stage. And you're always gonna have that adrenaline rush, and you're gonna have a little bit of nerves, but it's definitely improved tenfold over the last probably 2 to 3 seasons.
It's really cool to, to hear from someone who has been on that stage before multiple times and how you kind of handle it. And oh, I've learned this from the first one, this from the second one, and how it all kind of culminates together for this
Mm-hmm.
experience. I think it's going to be a really cool Olympia. I've heard that from everybody I've talked to, and I'm
Yeah.
really looking forward to actually going
We're
to
back
be out
in
there for
Vegas
it too.
too, so it's like, yeah, having it back in Vegas is just gonna, and then we're like on the strip, and it's yeah, so it's gonna be an awesome time. Like it's been a couple years since we've been in Vegas, so this should be a pretty special one, I believe.
Yeah, my first Olympia, and I'm
Oh, sweet.
really looking forward to it. So
And I always tell people like it's so hard to put into words sometimes. Even like I have like my regular commercial gym, and then I have like my bodybuilder gym where everyone there kind of competes. But the vibe is just so different, it's just different. Like everyone's there, like, and they kind of just get it. So, and no one looks at you for being a douche because you're posing in the mirror. Like they think it's normal, so it's fine. But it's such a different vibe. And like for me, like my kids have gone to every Olympia that I've competed at, so having them there, they're in a lot of the NPC. They're in like the magazine. I'm like, they got shots in the magazine. I don't have shots in the magazine, but like, so like they're like all in, And people were asking about them at Rising Kings. Like, you didn't bring the kids. I'm like, no, they'll be at the Olympia. You guys will see them in 6 weeks, So but it's just it's such a community. And some of the girls like, they have other personal stuff going on. I've checked in on them, and I've had people send stuff to the kids. So it's such a different community though. Like it's just hard to explain unless you're like in it.
yeah, it does. It seems like it's a really, really special group of people who are. It's all about your own journey, and then that when all
Hmm.
that kind of
Yeah.
comes together, it just feels like
Yeah.
everybody, like you said, they kind of get it. So
Hmm.
that's really
Yeah.
cool. But I really appreciate you coming on the podcast. It was really cool getting to talk to you, and
For
best of
sure.
luck in the next couple weeks.
Thank you. Thank you.
All
See you
right.
in Vegas.